This is Ivy Unleashed,
a Gold Ivy production.
Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed, everyone. Today is a very special day because we are talking to the real-life Maverick, the youngest fighter pilot and instructor the Air Force has ever seen. His call sign is Slick, and I met Slick, aka John, at a speaking event I attended in June. And after hearing the man's story, I knew we had to get him on the podcast. So Slick, welcome to Ivy Unleashed.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And, you know, there may have been a couple of younger instructors, but from, at the time, just to clarify, because, being factual fighter pilots, any fighter pilot listening to this, you're like, I got to fact check this. So yeah, I was the youngest guy to get selected to go to weapons school, which is the Air Force version of Top Gun for the F-16. So I was only flying the jet for about 2 years and 8 months and got selected to go. So it was pretty special for me.
Wow.
Still a big deal.
Such a big deal. And so many things about your career are a huge deal. And I am channeling Top Gun today with my outfit. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're not, feel free to tune in. When I first met John, which like Brooke said, we'll be calling him Slick, he was saying, make sure you watch the original Top Gun. And last night, as I'm thinking about recording with him, I realized I hadn't watched the original yet. So I went back, watched it last night. So I feel like I have so many questions about this life that you've lived because it's so extreme. It's so high energy. You were really young. And we really want to get into kind of your backstory before you even got to this point. Like, how do you decide that you want to be in the Air Force? And how do you start to just excel doing this?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that question. I mean, and I will tell you, for certain folks that are tied into aviation, so many of the stories were like, well, my grandfather was a pilot, or my grandmother was in the WASPs, and my had somebody who was an aviator, and they just kind of grew up with aviation in their lives, and that is absolutely amazing. Which I look at my kids now, and they have that background and that story. For me, I grew up on Long Island. It wasn't like there was an aircraft carrier next door, a Navy or an Air Force base where they're flying jets. We mentioned when we chatted earlier that this is how I know I'm getting old. And people are like, I've never seen the original Top Gun. I don't know what you're talking about. So, but when I was 10 in 1986, when Top Gun came out, and I was supposed to go, this was normal in the 80s, like get dropped off, with like your siblings to go to see a movie for the day. I was supposed to go see Transformers. And I walked right past Transformers and went right into the Top Gun movie theater. And of course, I got in trouble when I got home that I saw Top Gun.
There's some scandalous scenes in there.
Kissing scene. Yeah, that got me in trouble with my parents. Of course, I think like, many kids, boys or girls, I think, being a fighter pilot would be awesome. But it wasn't like that moment where, okay, boom, I'm 10 years old and I want to be a fighter pilot. No, I never thought that life could be for me. I was more of like a surfer skater kid, from Long Island. And I had a huge passion for photography and video, which is really ironic, like how we live now, because I was, the kid taking photos and videos of my friends surfing and skating and making movies. Right. And, I'm really dating myself, but I'd like the 2 VCRs and record, play, pause, and I'd figure out how to cut these videos. And I'm like, that's what I want to go to school for, because flying jets, that's way out of my league. I might be able to be an art teacher, if I get my degree and that type of thing. So did not have a lot of money in my family. So I was the first, guy to go to college in my family. My older sister graduated when I graduated. She graduated her bachelor's degree when I graduated high school. And then I joined the Air Force at 17, just trying to get money for school. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to do 4 years, get the benefits and run. Probably like most teenagers, you don't want to just be in the military and be a conformist and all that stuff. I more had, this art side of my brain going on. It was really being in the Air Force that I realized, wow, this life is a life I could live. So I sought out mentors and folks that really could help me, achieve that dream when I did kind of have my mind set on it. So yeah, that's really, when people ask about, well, how did you do it and all that, I set in my mind like what would be a nearly unachievable goal, but then I try to surround myself with people that would help me figure out how I could find a pathway to do it. And, the advice that I give young people now, when they, or really anybody, when they talk to me about this, as I say, it's really powerful. Something I don't know why and how I came up with this concept, but I was very conscious about finding, I'm like, man, that person's really cool. And I would say like, hey, can you give me some advice? And when I would ask that little bit, I think there's a human nature thing that just gets triggered. And I think genuinely people want to help other people, especially if they've achieved some level of success. And I would say, hey, can we set up a time? Can I take you to lunch? I was like, 19. I'm like asking people in their 30s and 40s that were massively successful, like, do you mind if I take you out to lunch? And, and the question that I would ask them is, okay, knowing what you know now, what advice can you tell me, at where I'm at in life to be where you're at? And that was just really, really such a power, a secret power tool that I had, was finding these mentors, asking those questions. And I had a lot of people take me under their wing because I was inquisitive and I wasn't afraid to ask. And, I can really go into depth because I did some crazy asks, but they were proper asks. They weren't, out of left field. But yeah, that's what really helped me get on the right path.
I love that. What's the best piece of advice you received?
I would always hear often, especially when I felt like I was doing well. And I not really like by nature, like this type A, very analytical, of course, but I just have this strange balance with like, just kind of being more emotionally intelligent and being in, where I think it's, like I say, like the art side of my brain, if you will, creative side, just seeking out feedback. Because, I had a lot of empty feedback in the beginning because, there were certain things that were finite. If it's like, well, I would look at something like, for example, the physical fitness test, because I was enlisted. And for those that know the military well, understand, when you're enlisted, typically out of high school, and I say typically, not for everybody, but, not a college graduate yet, learning more of a trade. And then you kind of work that in the Air Force or the military. The officers, well, they have to have a bachelor's degree at a minimum. They're in a different like job role, if you will. So I knew that I had to be essentially a cadet and I had to get my degree. So I just set the bar really high in the beginning. Yeah. So like the physical fitness test in the Air Force, to be a cadet, you had to have a passing score. I basically looked at, well, what would give me a perfect score? And I set that as my minimum. So, to me, it wasn't a win unless, I remember it was, you had to do 19 pull-ups, for my age group, which was, the youngest age group. I had to do 19 pull-ups in 60 seconds. I'm like, well, I need to be able to do 20, or you had to do 88 sit-ups in 2 minutes. And I was like, well, I have to be able to do 90. And so just really kind of setting that, goal as my minimum just made life a lot easier instead of, having the minimum be my minimum and then hoping to get above that. The best piece of advice that I got was, hey, you're on this journey. Okay. And you're at point A, and, there's a whiteboard, of course. There's always, in the fighter pilot world, like the whiteboard, like, the instructor with the marker, here's point A, and you want to be over here at point B. The fastest way to connect 2 points is via a straight line. So, this is how you want to get there, but it's not going to be that smooth. There are all these small gates and, points that you need to accomplish along the way, but there's going to be branches and sequels and distractions and all this stuff. You just need to remain focused. And then if you have to reset where you're if all of a sudden you take a 90-degree turn off of this, you have to reset where you are and then just, get back to navigating to that point that you want to be at. And so, I use that in my life and I give that advice to others, when we set on a journey. And, I do a lot of mentoring for young folks because, ultimately at the end of the day, I was a commander of a ROTC, which is kind of funny how I went full circle, and I had students and cadets and I had to advise them a lot. And that best piece of advice I've given to a lot of other people since then.
That's awesome. And I think it's such a great act of service to, well, not only serve your country, but then also help the people that once were you, right? You know what it's like to come from not a whole lot of money and then figure out a way to have massive success in the Air Force and in life as an entrepreneur, all kinds of things. I'm curious though about Now, watching Top Gun and thinking about the first time you actually fly your own jet, like what is that like to all of a sudden you're in the seat and you're flying that thing?
Yeah, I will. It's a great question because to me, that is the pivotal point when you do your first solo. Because at the end of the day, and not to sound morbid, but the reality is you have your own life in your hands, literally and figuratively, which is massively powerful from a confidence standpoint and everything else. I just remember reaching my solo, and the instructor, kind of ceremoniously gets out of the airplane, and they go, "All right, man, the jet's yours. Good luck," and shakes your hand. And then you go, "Okay, it's up to me." And I remember this sortie and rolling down the runway, and we had to do 3 takeoffs and landings and then come back and taxi in. And you feel so accomplished, which is really incredible.
I bet. Wow.
Terrifying.
Well, you're trained, you are trained up to that point. And they, of course, they're not going to send you if you're not, but it is one of those things. It is such a milestone is just an understatement.
Yeah, well, I'm sure all of the training that goes into it is just mind blowing. And when I met you, hearing all of your accomplishments, like Andrew said, in the Air Force, outside of the Air Force, where you are now, there takes an incredible level of self-discipline. And so I want to know what that looks like for you from a young age, maybe where it started to now when you look back at that.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I think historically I was not the most disciplined person. I didn't grow up really being disciplined. Like I said, I was kind of that more stereotypical surfer skater. I was more worried about hanging out with my friends and catching a ride at the beach than than really being regimented. And I truly applaud, honestly, knowing what I know now, the young folks that are disciplined in their early years. I mean, because they probably have a great network around them. They have great examples to, get up early and go to practice or whatever the case is. I mean, I think, just the world of that for young people. But I had to be very conscious about it, really figure out what worked for me. So eventually it kind of boiled down like this. And again, this has kind of been advice that I've passed around, but because I am much more of a YOLO, carpe diem, type of person. So, but you can have both worlds, right? You can have the, Dolce Vita and also be disciplined. So my mix kind of went like this. Monday, I was, hit the ground running Monday through, so 4.5 days. So Monday through Thursday into Friday. So Friday was like, no matter what was going on, if it was a good week, a bad week, or whatever, that was the time to spend with friends and family. That was going out to dinner, going for pizza, doing a barbecue, going to the bar or whatever, not getting crazy, but that was just 100% social time to decompress from the week, which I always knew is super important. And then Saturday, I did nothing Air Force, 0. And then Sunday became my prep day. So, that was, I would typically get up, get the laundry going, go to church or whatever it is that you do in the morning. I'd hit the grocery store on the way home. And then it was study time, prepping myself for the week. And then every night I watched Top Gun as I ironed my uniform.
You're serious.
As the motivational reminder of, what I'm doing and why I'm doing this, because you have the really hard weeks and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm making myself do, 19 pull-ups in 60 seconds. I could do 12 and pass this test. And it's like, no, the bar is that high. And I just, built in, that habit pattern of my life that way, so crush it during the day, go home, study, do whatever, but, just really having a bit of a routine in a big picture, a holistic routine. Not that I was like, I have to get up at 6 a.m. every day, The other couple things, which is really funny because now I think about it, there's so much advice, and I know you all talk about how important sleep is. I realized, if you're cramming for a test till 4 a.m, and that you have that 8 a.m. class to take that test, you're probably not really going to help yourself out if you don't know the material, right? I mean, so the trade-off of losing the 4 hours of sleep or getting, that 4 hours of sleep was always, I'm going to whatever time I had to wake up, I tried to back the clock up 8 hours and say, I'm going to study up to that point. And then it was, get myself ready for bed to try to get that good night's sleep, because my brain was not going to retain, whatever I was reading at 2 a.m.
I learned that way too late. I was like the one pulling the all-nighter. I'm like, I don't know why I didn't do well on that one.
Well, and it's sometimes you have to do it, but again, in the big picture, if you can trade off some prep and make sure that you're rested, you're going to probably perform a lot better. And for flying, of course, that was, a definite.
Would you say you always had these habits, or as you progress in life, they became more of habits? Because I remember when we first started chatting, it was, success at what cost of your health, because you had some health struggles, which we'll get into later on. But would you say you always had these habits?
No, I didn't. I mean, I had to kind of, it was not super conscious in the sense of like, from a health perspective or whatever. I just kind of built in this little, life strategy, if you will, for what worked for me. And not to say that it didn't violate those rules, right? It was like, man, I didn't touch this material, 5 hours sleep might be all I get, but I knew that I had to knock it off at some point and be rested. But no, I built that over time. And it mainly came, once I finally kind of honed it, in my senior year of college. I had been released from the Air Force active duty, and then I was a cadet, full-time college student. And it took me a few months to really come up with the system. But that's where I kind of mentioned, but even in pilot training, then that's where I really refined it, going to pilot training. And then I really kind of kept that. And then if I ever had something going on, because in the military, there's always kind of like additional milestones. You never just like, you've been in the Air Force for 4 years now, you made it. Then they go, no, now you're going to become a flight leader, you're going to become an instructor, then you're going to be a mission commander. Then you always have these next steps. So anytime I felt myself in the place where I had to take another test or reach another milestone, I kind of reverted back to that weekly kind of cycle, if you will. It was almost like a workout plan that I kind of put myself into.
It's awesome. That's what we try and model too, where we're like, we want our weekends to decompress. And, as an entrepreneur, your brain is always on, like you said, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And that too, like owning your own businesses, and it can be exhausting because you always feel like there's more that you could be doing. And so having those boundaries and protecting your peace and having time to be with the people that you love, it's super important. So I'm curious, in your time as a fighter pilot, what that's like to like party with friends and really let loose, or like go back to your friends. Like, what's that balance of like enjoying your youth and then being in a very serious role, like fighting for your country?
That's a really timely question, because I've just, had this recently, because I still continue to fly jets, and it really is the best of both worlds. But I will tell you that in the military, it works really well because everybody comes together and you're on a common footing because you're all on the same team, you're all in the same squadron, and the squadron succeeds together. Top Gun gets a lot of things really right. I mean, I would say like 99% right. Because there are some people like, I was a fighter pilot, it wasn't like that. I'm like, well, I don't know what squadron you were in, because it's very competitive. Everybody wants to be number one, and this is something, even from pilot training is the best example, because if there's 20 people in your pilot training class, there's going to be a number one and there's going to be a number 20. I mean, that's just a fact. So if you're like, I was 14th in my class, it's just the way it is. But also the margin of difference, like academically. So there's, Air Force is really great of recognizing people, so you have like the academic award. But in my pilot training class, the person who won the academic award had like a 99.8 GPA, if you will, for like the test that we take through the year of pilot training. The number 20 person had like a 98.2, right? So it's like everybody is the literal best of the best folks that you're competing with. But because of that, I think, a bit of common bond, right? Like everybody knows what it is that we're doing. We say, although, we have the rank as fighter pilots, the rank comes off once you hit the briefing room door. So if the three of us were going to go fly, Andrea is the CEO, that's great. But today we're all flying, and, You might be the wingman off of Brooke, who might be the newest person flying, but whatever she says goes. And so then you fly to that standard, you execute, as long as it's not, as we say, dumb, dangerous, or different, right? We're going to let Brooke make those decisions. We may know that there will be an issue or a flaw or something like that, but we let people learn from their mistakes, and then we come back and we debrief to it. And that is really the secret sauce to why the United States Air Force is so amazing, because for every hour we fly, we probably debrief for 4 to 5 hours. So just like you saw in Top Gun when Maverick's in the tax trailer and, she says, I had to say what was on my mind, even though I see that brilliance in your flying, right? I mean, you're going to hurt feelings and you're going to tell people how it is. But there's also the very, very public rule of like what happens in the debrief basically like ends there. Or you can tell me, you did a horrible job today. I mean, you almost got us killed. We almost died. It was really bad. Like, you need to fix that. And I will say, you're right. And then we go, all right, let's go have a beer. Or whatever it is, right? I mean, so you leave that briefing room door knowing that everything that was done in the brief or in the debrief was to make us collectively better. And it's not personal. It's not about feelings. It's just, I'm going to lay out the facts and it is what it is. And then boom, we all have a beer together at the end of the day. And it's not about the alcohol, as we often say. It's just more about the camaraderie. People don't care if you're having a beer or not. They just want you to be at the proverbial bar hanging out together.
Yeah. I always think, like, as I was watching it, I was like, I wonder what Slick's personality was. And like, first of all, we need to know how you got your name. But I was like thinking, okay, sitting here, when Iceman's saying like, you're dangerous. Like, what you did out there was stupid. And like, I'm like, isn't everything dangerous? Like, but they're like, Iceman makes like no mistakes. And like Maverick is awesome because he takes risks and, all these things. So how did you get your name, and what kind of a pilot were you, or are you, I should say?
Well, I tell you, the name thing really is a play off of my last name, which is Baum, but everybody pronounces Baum. So, don't yell my last name running through an airport. It's probably not, unless you can say it the right way. So in the Air Force, we have different types of bombs, and one of them is a slick bomb. And, luckily, I had showed up, and it's after you become mission ready is when you get your call sign. And luckily, I hadn't really screwed anything up too much. So I was high speed, low drag, like a slick bomb. So that was kind of it.
High speed, and what else did you say?
Low drag. So kind of an airplane, aerodynamics thing.
I was thinking of what my call name would be, and I came up with Mamba because it says mom in it. And it's like, I don't like snakes, but like they strike and you like don't see them coming. And so that's my call name. I give myself the name Mamba. What are you?
I don't know. I need to think about it. I need to take some time because this is serious.
Yeah, I was thinking about it because I'm like, she can't be a bird. She doesn't like birds.
Hate them.
What name would you give Brooke?
Oh, I don't know. It's normally you got to hang around and kind of know their ticks.
She's kind of like smooth and like creative out of nowhere, and like, I would say kind of unpredictable.
Oh,
what would that be?
Tell me more.
Yeah, what would that be? We'll come up with it anyway.
She's Maverick. That sounds like a Maverick to me.
Ooh,
I am Maverick.
What
Yes,
are you, Mav?
Sound off in the comments what you think I should be. I'm just fascinated, Slick, by how it's like one thing after another. You just keep climbing up this ladder, and then at some point you decide, I'm going to do my own thing, and I'm going to become an entrepreneur while still in the Air Force. So talk to us about how that happened.
So I lived the Air Force fighter pilot dream. So I go to Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training, which was super cool because now I had students and instructors from all the NATO countries. So Germans and Italians in my class, and then German and Italian instructors, really amazing. I went to the Air Force Weapons School, which is, the Navy has the cool name Top Gun. They call it weapons. We both call it weapons school, but they call theirs Top Gun. So I went through essentially Top Gun, asked to come back and teach at Top Gun. And then when I was there, I got asked to fly with the Thunderbirds, which was great. And so I got to do that. And then I had to pay the piper and go to the Pentagon and do, that kind of work. So during that time, we basically formed a civilian jet team, and we were flying essentially the same level with civilians. And, I was active duty still, which I had, all the approval from the JAGs and all that. Hey, I'm going to fly with this group on the weekends. But we essentially were doing the same thing that the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels were doing every weekend, but we're doing it with different airplanes that were, cheaper to run. And we had like literally 1/10 of the personnel force that the Thunderbirds of the Blue Angels have. So, Thunderbirds go do an air show on the weekend. They have 130 people that are on the team to go do it. We were doing it with like 12 to 13 people.
Wow.
And who are the Thunderbirds for people who don't know?
And the Blue Angels.
And the Blue Angels.
The air demonstration team for the United States Air Force to represent, the pride, precision, and professionalism of, the United States, or their United States Air Force. Your taxpayers. This is your Air Force. So, and they go out on the weekends between March and November to talk about the Air Force's mission and highlight what airmen do every day, in the U.S. and overseas. So it's a pretty incredible opportunity and job to really represent, about 690,000 people through your engagement with the public and through the aerial display. So really, really neat. If you get a chance to Google it, check it out on YouTube if you haven't seen it, or go to an air show. I think you really enjoy it. Yeah, so now we're flying the same pace that the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels are doing. And that was really our proof of concept, because we were doing it with 1/10 of the personnel and more than 1/10 of the cost. So we essentially amassed the largest privately owned Air Force in the world. And it was a huge savings to the taxpayer, because what we did was provide adversary support to the Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, to a lot of the industry professionals out there, where they would say like, hey, we're developing this new pod that goes on a fighter jet. And instead of the Navy having to provide an F-18, off of the ship to then do some testing, they would hire us to do it. So then, taxpayer assets could be, allocated to doing what they should be doing, which is defending the country. And then we were taking all the other type of jobs.
How'd you come up with that? Like, how did you think like, oh, maybe we could be their little scrimmage team? Like, who thought of that?
When I taught at the weapons school, I had the largest program that, we needed the most. We call it Red Air, the scrimmage team, the people that are playing the bad guys. And we almost didn't graduate classes because we couldn't get enough assets to come. So we'd call the Navy, hey, can you bring, 6 airplanes or whatever? Really one of my friends, Sean Gustafson, really thought that, the commercial side of it could work. And we had this proof of concept. And I knew, having been on the demand side, knowing like, oh my gosh, I could have used a service like this when I was a captain trying to get these assets to come fight us at weapons school. So yeah, this should really work well. And so, we had kind of the inside track of knowing how you would do it. And then we had the commercial side to really get things together. And, it just grew. And I'll tell you, it was something that the Air Force didn't want. It was a field of dreams scenario. If you build it, they will come. And we basically said, look, if we have an entire like Air Force base worth of fighter jets on a run, on the taxiway somewhere, the Air Force is not going to ignore it. But they did for a while, until finally they gave us the call, and the rest is history. So yeah, we had the 14th largest Air Force in the world. We had a bigger Air Force than Canada. So it was pretty crazy. And, we continue to support not only the Department of Defense in the US, but overseas in Europe. We have a very large footprint now. So we've actually taken.
That is so badass. And there's so much money like in the military to think about that too. But, in Top Gun, they were saying like one of those jets is $30 million. So like, how do you fund getting all of that?
Yeah, so we were really good at buying airplanes. So really getting into the weeds, we found, our business model was never, country X flew their airplanes into the ground. They parked them out into the desert. We, bought them, painted them, fixed them up, and put them back into service. We sought the best deals that we could. So one quick example, New Zealand had an airplane called the A4, and they were supposed to get the F-16. So they spent, I think it was $330 million upgrading their fleet of airplanes, to basically look, they were an A4 on the outside, but they were an F-16 on the inside. So they had radar and avionics and all this stuff. And for me as an F-16 guy, I got in the cockpit the first time. I was like, wow, I could fly this thing like that, as far as knowing all the avionics and stuff like that. But we got that for not, I will tell you, under 10 million. We got that entire fleet. And so, we had our CEO, self-funded the initial tranches, and then we just built the company out from there, and then eventually exited in 2019.
Brilliant. You are brilliant and such a hard worker. And as you're saying this, I see the success, right? I see the hard work. What about your health? Talk to us about during this time what your health looked like.
Well, I tell you, so this was, so now I'm living like a double life, right? I'm an active duty officer. I'm now a lieutenant colonel, becoming a commander. And then I also have like this side hustle where, we're flying air shows for fun on the weekend. Everything's on the up and up with the Jags because, you're allowed to have, be an entrepreneur as an American and as a service member. So say, hey, like, this is what we're doing. We're building this thing. So, as an entrepreneur, like you said, you're on 24/7. And I'm also, a full-time active duty commander. And so I, looking back, I'm like, man, I had this double life where I had to be a, high power officer, running my unit and all that kind of stuff and produce results there, and then turn around and, manage like, oh, we have a business meeting in England. Okay. I need to now take leave from the Air Force. Then guys do my security clearance and all that kind of stuff where, hey, I'm traveling, I'm going to go do this trade show and all that stuff. And so I was just running. And military is really, really good, especially as a fighter pilot, to make sure that you have, your class 1 flight physical. And, it's very much like the movies, you're in tip top shape. And I was just really running off of, stubborn, hardcore willpower, and just then not taking my own advice and not sleeping and really running super hardcore, to where I was working in the Pentagon. And one of the fighter pilot traditions, as I mentioned, on Friday nights, we all get together. Even if you don't drink and all that kind of stuff, every squadron has a bar. So we, always we go to the bar. And it was just like the check-in at the end of the week, let's high five about what was good, what was bad. We always, would joke. There's always a reason, to hang out and have the proverbial, drink on a Friday night, because either you had a good week or your buddy, or you had a bad week, or your buddy had a good week, or your buddy had a bad week, and all that. So we all always be together. And traditionally, every fighter squadron has a popcorn machine where we make this jalapeno popcorn, which is, amazing. So you put the jalapenos in there and you let them fry up while things spinning, and then you add the corn kernels, and it just pops, and throw some Lowry seasoned salt on there, and you're off to the races. So, but I was having trouble swallowing popcorn on Friday night. This is just how this thing started. I'm like, I kind of have to clear my throat and, take another drink so I could get popcorn, down. And so, but I was just running at such a fast pace. My wife was like, dude, you need to go to the doctor for this. I'm like, I know, I'll make an appointment. I'd go to the, finally carve out time, make an appointment, I get my, let me feel your lymph nodes. No, everything's good to go. And I'm like, man, I just don't feel right. And, the flight doctor's like, hey man, nothing's wrong with you. Your blood work's good. Throat's fine. Welcome to 40, dude. You're not going to have as much energy as you normally are going to have, yada, yada. So years go by as I'm, every 6 months going to the doc, getting my checkup, getting my class 1 flight physical and all this stuff. And I honestly became like, as terrible as it is, like a household joke. I'd tell my wife like, hey honey, I'll see you later, unless I die of throat cancer between now and then, because, I don't know what's going on. Multiple doctors. I then moved from the Pentagon to where I was an ROTC commander in my wife's hometown. We were able to move my assignment. Her grandparents were ill at the time, so I had an assignment to Japan that I turned down to take this job, which was a godsend that the Air Force hooked me up with that. And then, I had this doctor start talking to me like, well, maybe you have an autoimmunity, maybe you have something wrong, also kind of welcome to 40. And I was like, man, I just kind of plow through it. So I'm like 3.5 years into this journey, and, still joking like, gonna die of throat cancer. They can't figure this thing out. And I was talking to a friend, I had my head turned, and when I was talking or something, my wife goes, oh my God, you have this giant lump in your throat. I'm like, what? And I turned my head, and then if I swallowed, it was like a golf ball. We just go up and down. And like, finally we go to a totally different doctor, and they do, so we went to a surgeon, does an ultrasound of my throat, and he goes, dude, what are you doing tomorrow? Because what you're doing tomorrow is getting your thyroid removed. And I'm like, okay. So I have my cool thyroid scar here. And I went from, just high powered running on every cylinder to now not having a thyroid. And, for a guy who sets the bar at, 100% is the minimum, right? 19 pull-ups is the max, but it's your min, to now I'm laying in a hospital bed and we're trying to, run a business. And I'm like, this is crazy. I mean, this isn't supposed to happen to me. And it wasn't, like a woe is me thing. It was just like, all right, well, how do I just get through it? And, one of the big things so what ended up being was Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So just all of this inflammation and stress on my body, and it triggered this autoimmunity to where my body goes, thyroid bad, let's attack that thing. It's a foreign object in your body. And so now I have this total infighting going on at the cellular level. They couldn't find it because basically what was happening, for those that don't know, because I didn't know any of this, right? I might have an idea of what my thyroid is, but it's basically a butterfly shaped gland that goes around behind your esophagus. And I was growing these tumors, and it was essentially crushing my esophagus. So you couldn't see it or feel it from the outside until it finally got so big. So I had 3 of them, literally the size of golf balls. So where after the surgery, this guy has removed like 3,000 thyroids. And he goes, dude, I had to take a picture of this one because it's the gnarliest one I've ever seen. So yeah, so now I go from this guy who's climbing mountains and doing triathlons and CrossFit and all this other stuff to not having a thyroid. And it was a really, really lonely place for 2 reasons. Number one, it's like, I think the statistic is like 98% of thyroid issues are with females. So it's pretty atypical for men to have these issues. Not that they can't have them, but a lot of the information that's out there is going to be like in Cosmo and stuff like that. And I'm like reading anything and everything that I can get my hands on. Like, I'm like, gender has nothing to do with this. This is just about, an issue that I happen to have. And then the other thing was that normally it's identified through your blood work, but for whatever reason, I get, my thyroid was still functioning. So it wasn't showing up on any blood work, but I had to have a full thyroidectomy, where most folks kind of have like a thyroid that's not behaving. It's either, overproducing or normally underproducing. And therefore you get where you're tired and you're irritable and you feel bloated all the time, just all this kind of like yucky feeling, which, I definitely had that, the energy level, but, I was just so headstrong that I could just push myself mentally through it, trying to listen to my body, but then also knowing like, dude, you just get it done. Right. So now I have no thyroid. And so that second lonely place was, I went from having a thyroid to not having a thyroid without anything leading up to it. So a lot of times people will have like this 10-year battle with their thyroid kind of acting up, and they get on medication and they change it and some things work, and then your body gets used to the medication, or you change medication and all this stuff, to where I'm just like cold turkey, no thyroid, and you're a dude, and there's no literature, there's no Facebook group, for you to get on. So yeah, that was the really, really tough part. So, one thing as a weapons school instructor, we say like, we're experts at becoming experts, right? So I'm like, well, now I know to jump into the medical journals and start learning as much as I can. And, of course they put you, for those that understand or maybe are dealing with a thyroid issue, the first thing the doctor says, oh, I'm going to put you on Synthroid. It's synthetic thyroid hormone, and that's going to bring your levels to where they need to be. That's what they did. I had my thyroid out. They gave me like a thing, like, okay, you have to take this every day on an empty stomach. I'm like, you'll be fine. And I wasn't fine because the levels were off, and it's a journey. It takes a long time for your body, especially when you go, as I'm saying, like cold turkey with the thyroid, and then it's gone. Your body still kind of remembers, and it kind of almost like fakes it and makes, thyroid hormone for you, if you will, until, a few months till it's finally completely out of your system. And then you're augmenting it now, which you have to, because you don't have a thyroid at all. But like the thing with Synthroid, and for those that, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but there's the T3 and the T4 and all that. And they're like, well, we'll see if you're a converter or not, because Synthroid is just, the TSH hormone. I'm like, well, it's impossible for me to convert any T3 to T4 because I don't have a thyroid. And that's where that functionality happens. So I'm like, okay, I'm like, doc, this is how it's going to go. I'm going to be miserable for 2 years because you're going to put me on and you're going to change my Synthroid, for the next year. Then you're finally going to realize that the Synthroid doesn't work. You're going to, hopefully put me on Armour Thyroid. The insurance companies don't like to cover that. And then they had historically had like, quote unquote bad batches where it wasn't, very easy for the pharmaceutical companies to keep that very consistent across like the dosage range. So, sometimes you get a bad batch and it's either too much or too little and all that. So I'm like, this is how it's going to go down. And he's like, yep, that's how it's going to go. So it took really 2 years to really dope it out. And luckily, because I was so engaged and taking care of my health and kind of almost advising my doctors on, knowing my own symptoms and, saying, dude, I need blood work every 6 weeks. And so now I become the expert on reading my own labs and saying like, hey, I think I need to bump my thyroid up a little bit. And, and that type of thing. I didn't have to take the full year or 2 years, I'm sorry, but like within about 8 months, I got back to where I totally needed to be. But I mean, it is for somebody like me who's just very like, I can just plow through it. And, I don't think I'm invincible by any sense of the imagination, but I'm just used to mentally, through hard work, being able to get through and accomplish what I want. And then when you're just like, I cannot get off the couch today. Right. And my wife, who is amazing, was just like, well, come on, you got to go. And she was, super encouraging, but then also realizing too, like, sometimes you're just going to have this autoimmune flare based on what's going on. And you're going to have to take 2 days to where you just chill and just, Netflix and, eat healthy and just try to recover and recoup. I had to change the way I worked out. I was doing CrossFit and all this other stuff, which was just volume wise too much for me, and just really had to take it down a notch. But, I've really been almost to keep my body composition to the way I was, while I was a Thunderbird and all those kind of things. So that has been really good, because that's the other part, that your fitness becomes your identity sometimes. If you are fit, right? People know you as the fit person. And so I didn't want to lose that either. So really apologize, a long answer to one question, but that was the journey.
I keep thinking about people too that like don't even know that they have thyroid issues. They just feel tired, or they feel like, or they don't have access to care like you did with, probably the amount of money or the resources, and they're just living their life.
Well, it's tough because
exhausted.
And people don't know, right? If you go to your gyno or your PCP and you have a full thyroid panel done, 9 times out of 10, you're fine with their criteria. Now, if you go to an alternative medicine doc or a functional doc, they look at different things than a normal doctor does. And a lot of times those doctors aren't covered by insurance. And so it is that education piece that, Slick was talking about, is I will become an expert of my own health, and having to advocate for yourself. And when you don't feel well, it's exhausting. But for, the people that don't know, autoimmune, a lot of the times it's caused by stress. Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disorder caused by stress. And so it's like, I'm curious, looking back at what you know now, is there something you would have done differently?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing was finding those balance points, because I was just so wired, and kind of how there's all the memes and all the reels about how Americans are, what their voicemail is on vacation, right? Like, hey, I'm on vacation of my dream, my dream vacation, but if you email me, I'll be back with you in 2 hours instead of like 2 minutes, right? So, but I remember laying, I just had my thyroid out and like all the tubes and everything in me, and I was like laying in the hospital bed with my laptop on, just like banging out emails. And my CEO at the time and good friend was like, dude, like, enough, close the laptop, stop with the emails, get recovered. And and he is a guy who's massively successful, and he, I think I'm a hard worker. This guy is an amazingly hard worker. So that was a bit of the wake up call. So really what I would have done was just really listen to my body more and take a little bit more of the downtime. I think that there are some times, at what cost, right? Your health at what cost? And you're like, all right, hey, I'll give you $1 million, but I'm going to cut off your pinky toe, right? You're like, yeah, I'd sacrifice that little guy for $1 million. And I don't like wearing, sandals anyway. So I'm a closed toe shoe guy from now on. And yeah, $1 million for that. But, so, and I say that really jokingly, but to kind of describe, like, I think for those that want to be successful, you're going to grind it out. You're going to miss hours of sleep. You're going to, have to tell, your spouse or whatever the case is, like, look, we're going through, like, it's time to grind. If we want this level of success, and it's going to take sacrifice, it's going to be, some days apart and, sleepless nights or whatever the case may be. And you can get through that. But I did that for like 6 years straight. And so, the only vacations I took were when we were doing, like work vacations, and they were a fun time when we were going places. But, it was like, all right. And then we got, we just got to the Bahamas, but, we have a work call in an hour. So get unpacked and all. So it wasn't really unplugging and de-stressing. So I think that is just the biggest thing. I mean, I wasn't taking time to go get a massage once a week or once a month or, once every 6 months. I wasn't just unplugging or getting up early in the morning before the chaos was, just going outside and being grounded and, taking in some sun and just kind of doing one of these numbers where you have your arms out and close your eyes and you start getting ready for the day. And so I'm very conscious about it, not because I'm saying like I need to do this for my health, but I just do that because I like it and it makes me feel better. So I think just trying to be in tune, and this is where your podcast is helping folks to think about doing those things and building those things into their daily habit, so that they don't get, as we say in the flying world, like behind the power curve. And now you're trying to catch up, because sometimes you get so far behind like I did and you can't catch up. And now I have to take a pill every day for the rest of my life to live. And I don't think anybody wants to be in that scenario. So that's why, I really appreciate you, asking me to talk about this, because it's, in my circles, guys aren't sitting around Friday and going, yeah, I'm kind of feeling tired this week. It is that, Maverick Iceman relationship of like, it's like, I can't let them see me sweat. I can't let them see me getting tired. I want to be the next whatever it is, right? Not that you're hurting your peers or whatever, but it is a competitive environment. And the one who shows up prepared and who performs is usually the one that's going to get selected to do, the next cool, upgrade, as we would call it, or opportunities.
I think it's important for guys like you who are so successful to be vulnerable and tell the people, hey, if you don't slow down, you will burn out. And if you burn out, it's a hell of a lot harder to reach those dreams. Right?
But also, what he did got him super successful, and he does have the accolades and stuff. So I bet they're like, screw it, I'll take my thyroid. If I can be slick, I'll friggin' do exactly what he did. And it's like, you're a mentor to people. And so how is that shifting now from like the advice you would have given back then versus now with like how you have to weave in some self-care?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And, I was lucky to really start becoming aware of these things. And I think it's just, the natural part of growing up and getting older and wiser. But I always told my students, like, kind of like how I mentioned in my weekly flow, if you will, but like, you have got to take time to smell the roses, right? And at the end of the day, if you're late on an email, and I'm not saying being complacent at your job, right? That's totally different. But, when you go, hey, it's time to unplug, and, the military folks, especially, they get 30 days of paid vacation a year. So you can carve out that time. I was the guy who didn't take any vacation, because it was almost like a point of pride to be like, we would call use or lose. If like the fiscal year rolls over and you had 62 days of leave, the balance was 60 because you could only carry 60 days over. Yeah, there were times where I had like 100 days of leave on my balance sheet. And then, I'd lose 40 days of paid vacation because I'm just like, the squadron cannot live without me if I'm gone for, a week. And then it's like, no, dude, the squadron's going to be fine. You go take care of yourself and come back and that type of thing. So I think that balance piece is absolutely what I really talk to folks about. And it's been really encouraging, for me, that I have some of my former students, that are now captains, and they're kicking butt, and I stay in contact with them, and they're doing really well. Just last year, one of my students, and I'll just tell this quick story, but brilliant guy, engineer, gets an engineering slot in the Air Force, which is a really big deal. Then turns around and gets a pilot slot. So he's going to pilot training. He's like, this is great. Goes to his class 1 flight physical, and they're like, dude, you have slight scoliosis. You can still be in the Air Force, but you can't sit on an ejection seat, because if you were to punch out, you might get hurt. So pilot slot's gone. And now he's like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, man, the Air Force needs folks like you to fly remotely piloted aircraft, or as it's known in the media as drones, right? So this guy, he goes from one high to a low, and then he gets back on, and he just graduated weapons school, and I got to go. He had invited me to come out to put his patch on his arm, as his former commander, which was just amazing to see. Giving him the advice of, you got to put yourself in the right place and surround yourself with the right people. And I know you want to be flying jets and going upside down and doing all that stuff, but you can take your talent and apply it here and be uber successful because of who you are. So a little bit of mind shift, really helped him out. And now he's like the top of his peer group and just, kicking butt in that community. So I think it's just having that awareness of there isn't one answer, like we mentioned before, like getting from point A to point B, you want it to be a straight line, but sometimes your starting point gets shifted, the middle of the way through the journey, and you just have to reset and, reassess your goals.
We're so grateful that you took time out of your busy life to share your message with us. I know everyone listening is going to want to follow, keep up with you, because you're doing some amazing things. Your social media is amazing. So where can everyone find you?
Well, thanks. Just my call sign and last name. So @SlickBaum is where I really enjoy, posting some fun stuff on Instagram. And I actually host a podcast as well called the Aerospace Advantage. So much more inside the think tank type of world. But we just had an incredible story with a friend who is 88 years young. He had 4 tours in Vietnam and just saw some incredible things. It's our newest episode out there. I think people, even if you're not a military or flying buff, would just enjoy some of the stories that this gentleman had shared with me on the podcast. It was really fun to do. So it's called the Aerospace Advantage.
I love it. Yeah, it's so interesting. And you're so different than anybody we've ever talked to. It's awesome. I mean, that's why we love what we do, because we can have people with completely wild life stories, but it all comes back to, again, these tiny, small, tangible things we can all do to check in with ourselves. It's like the same story of like everybody ends up getting to eventually, right? And that's why we'll keep saying like these small things you can do. And for, it can look different in everybody else's life, but just slowing down a little bit to check in and listen to yourself, because it doesn't matter your accolades. Like, your health needs to be a priority. And if it's not, like, your illness will have to be your priority. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Well, no, of course. And I just want to end with, no matter no matter how wealthy you are, the one commodity nobody can buy is more time. So how you spend that time is super important. And you can talk to, you look at Steve Jobs, who is massively successful and wealthy. And at the end of the day, he's just like, I just want to be surrounded with my friends and my family, because all of it doesn't matter. And the bridges that you burn and everything else on your journey to become successful are things that you have to be conscious about. So, and I think that's the earlier in life that you learn that lesson and really internalize it, I think the happier your life in general is going to be. So that's just one parting shot.
Oh, amen. Spitting so much wisdom. I love it. I knew you wouldn't disappoint. So happy we had this moment. And we have a little more from you. We have our 3 gold stars. So our top takeaways for our listeners. Would you please share yours?
We all get this one journey on this planet, right? So take some time to be conscious about what you want your journey to look like. And if at the end of the day you want to, be a Scrooge McDuck and have a, pile of money that you roll around in bed with, if that's what you want, then great. You realize you're going to be alone. That's really the number one. The number 2 is that I believe, your health and your relationships are what makes your life meaningful. Choosing, and it doesn't have to be in a bad way, because of course, we look at social media and we see these things that like, if that person doesn't call you back, like, just ignore them. And all, it's more of like a toxic approach, but really just measuring, what makes you happy, what makes you fulfilled, is one of those things that I think is really how you kind of just detoxify your life. And, the last one is, I really believe this, especially, my background, coming from a broken home and not a lot of money and all these kind of things, at the end of the day, if you really truly visualize what you want your life to be, and you surround yourself with those folks, and you start on that path of understanding where you want point B to be, you got to keep that straight line. You can get there. And if you can't, like, let's say I want to be a fighter pilot, but for you have a physical way that you can't do it, there's probably another way. As I mentioned with my student who wanted to be a fighter pilot but couldn't pass the physical fitness test, but is doing something so similar and fulfilling. And he's told me, he's like, dude, I'm so glad I didn't go to pilot training. I am so happy doing what I'm doing here. That when you have the right goals in mind, and you achieve them and adjust them for what you realistically can achieve, then really the sky's the limit.
The sky's the limit. I see what you did there. Awesome. And next up is Unleashing Ivy. We always like to ask our guests 3 surprise questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
As you can tell, I'm really intrigued with this whole Top Gun weapons school idea. And I want to hear a story of, I always like to hear about hardship and how you got through it. And so when you think about your experience there and like one of your hardest days or seasons there, what happened and how did you get through it?
Yeah, so I had a really unique experience because at the time we had the F-16 was kind of had 3 kind of stovepiped missions, if you will. And I was really good at the one mission that I had come from, but I was going to be a weapons officer, which is, you're basically the top instructor. And it's very different than the Navy, because we in the Air Force, we only have one person is like your Top Gun instructor for your squadrons. There's normally about 40 people, 40 pilots in a squadron, and you have one weapons officer. So on Fridays, it's like the weapons officer gives academics, and even if you're 20 years older than this person, it's like that's the direction that the squadron's going tactically, so you have to follow that. So I had to learn a new mission, which was very, very hard and complicated, and be going into, when I graduated weapons school, being the weapons officer of this mission called SEED, the Suppression of Enemy Air Defenses. And basically I had, this combat hardened, instructor who was my instructor at weapons school, and basically, come nose to nose to me. He's like, dude, you're not getting through this course to go be a weapons officer in a SEED squadron unless you get through me. And I'm like, okay, like, what does that mean? Talk about an uphill battle where, weapons school is hard enough, but then I have to be the expert, because I can't have, at that time, like a brand new lieutenant come in and know more about the mission than me. So that was really the hardest part, and how I overcame that, instead of looking at this guy who was, nose to nose with me, to go, okay, this guy's now my adversary and I have to get through you. I turned the tables, and I was like, okay, well then it's your job to teach me everything so that the young lieutenant isn't going to embarrass the weapons officer on the first time of academics. And became one of my best mentors that I ever had. And because of that uphill battle, I wasn't winning any awards at weapons school, but when he gave me my patch, it meant and so much more because of that challenge. And then I was luckily successful in that role. So,
wow, so badass. Okay, my question is about what's next. So you sell your business. What is life like for you now, and what is that next goal that you're after, or the current goal you're after, I should say?
Yeah, so I'm really focused in a couple areas because I just can't say no, and I do enjoy, just continuing to take on more challenges. So I'm the philanthropy director for the first all-civilian space program. So we are working with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, trying to gain as much awareness and funds as we can while we're continuing, to explore space. But we need to make life better here on Earth, and to eradicate childhood cancer is our goal. So we are really, really focused on that. And then, other than, that professionally, I just continue to fly, and I love flying in air shows, but it's really, to your point, Brooke, I have realized talking with other people that I kind of have like a duty and a responsibility to share, some of this, which I do enjoy. I love to mentor other folks. So that's really what I'm doing, is, finding that niche to be able to, really make impacts through the work doing philanthropy, and then also, sharing and mentoring through speaking engagements and other things like that.
Wow. You're such like a well-rounded person. I keep thinking of like, just thinking of the excuses you could have had as a kid of like where you came from and like figuring out a way. I feel like you just keep figuring out a way to make the best of whatever scenario you're in, right? Like your health goes to crap and then you're like, I'm going to find the best way to not only help myself out, but now tell people what you're learning. And then you get a bunch of money. Awesome. Because you sell your amazing business that you built. And then you're like, and I'm going to eradicate childhood cancer, so I love that you're so young. I just cannot wait to even see where the second half of your life goes. And then our final question, Unleashing Ivy, just has to do with what you would have told younger you, whether that's little Johnny, John, Slick, entrepreneur self. Like if you could go back and tell your younger self one thing, what would you tell him?
Yeah, I think it would just be, surrounding yourself with the kind of people that you want to be, and I admit based on background and stuff like that, not that surfing or skateboarding is a bad sport, but, probably not the most influential crowd that I could have been hanging around with. And I did turn that around, when I was a junior in high school, and, I graduated high school early. So I kind of, ramped it up at the very end there. But I would have had a much easier path had I learned that earlier, which is tough to tell, somebody who might be, 12 or 13 that, the friends that you're hanging around with might not be, the best influence in your life. If I could have told myself that, for sure, because I probably should have had an adult tell me that. But, we were 80s kids, man. We spent a lot of time on our own. The latchkey kid thing was real. So, there's some great memes about, don't mess with somebody who was, a teenager in the 80s or something, like, right? So.
Well, you were able to be a kid. I think that's important too, right? To have that time. So maybe that's why you could be so disciplined. You had your freedom or, probably a more relaxed mindset for a while until you decided to buckle down.
Well, again, thank you for your time. Like you just said, you are the 5 people you spend the most time with. Relationships are everything. And we're so grateful that you're in our circle now, that our audience gets to know you and follow your journey. And we leave our listeners with a quote, what we call a piece of gold. So John, Slick, would you please share yours?
Oh, it's really tough to just pick one quote, because I've been really fortunate to have a lot of, great experiences. I think the one thing is, be who you want to be. And, as general and simplistic as that is, I think really you can take that mindset. I would leave myself sticky notes or take the bar of soap and write a note, of encouragement to myself going through, college and pilot training and all those things. But, just you got to be yourself and you got to be focused, and eventually you're going to achieve that goal.
This is Gold Ivy signing off.
Listen to your truth and go chase your gold.